The slap landed before the sound did. One moment I was standing in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan, champagne glass still cold against my fingers. The next, my head snapped sideways, fire exploding across my left cheek, and the metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. The crystal chandeliers above us kept glittering as if nothing had changed. Over 100 people, partners of the Orlov Hospitality Group, journalists, the entire press contingent invited for the launch of the new bridal line, stood frozen in a silence so complete, it felt like the air itself had been sucked out of the room. Dmitry Orlov stood in front of me, breathing hard, the same way he did when a deal was about to collapse in a boardroom. Behind him, Sophia Vance clutched the front of her white dress, where a spreading stain of red wine bloomed like a wound. Dmitry's jacket was already draped over her shoulders. He had placed himself between us so completely that I could no longer see her face. "Enough," he said, voice low and final. I didn't touch my cheek. The pain was sharp, but what settled deeper was something quieter, an unexpected stillness, as if a long, constant noise inside my chest had finally stopped. Sophia's voice trembled prettily. "Dmitry, you don't have to. It was my fault." I looked at her. The white dress. The careful way her fingers brushed his hand, the way she made herself small and fragile, in a room full of cameras that had been rolling since the evening began. Stationary cameras set up to capture guest reactions for the promotional video. She had known they were there. Of course she had. 3 minutes earlier she had walked up to me with a bright, almost cheerful smile. "Katya. Long time." "Sophia." I heard from Dmitry. "Your little Misha is 4 now, isn't he?" He showed me pictures. He looks so much like his father. Her eyes dropped to my left hand. "You're still wearing the ring. I'm married." She laughed softly, the sound light and deliberate. Of course, that single word carried everything. She wanted me to understand that the marriage was a technicality, something temporary standing between her and the life she believed she still deserved. I set my glass down carefully. "If you have business to discuss, speak with the staff. You're so cold, you haven't changed. Don't speak as if you know me." Her smile faltered for half a second, then returned. She glanced toward Dmitry, who was still across the room speaking with a Japanese investor. "But Dmitry hasn't changed either," she said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "He still remembers the tea I like. He met me at the airport. And this dress, he said it would look beautiful on me. 3 days, that was how long Dmitry had been absent from our apartment. 3 nights of cold dinners and unanswered messages. 3 mornings of waking up alone and telling myself it was only work." Sophia watched my face the way a surgeon watches for a reaction. Then her fingers closed around my wrist. "Let go," I said quietly. She didn't. She looked past me, saw Dmitry beginning to walk toward us, and stumbled backward with perfect timing. The glass in her hand tilted. Red wine poured down the front of her white dress. She collapsed to the floor as if I had shoved her. It took less than 4 seconds. Dmitry reached her first. He helped her up, then turned to me. There was no question in his eyes. Only the cold certainty of a man who had already decided who was guilty. "You saw it," I said. "I saw nothing that changes what just happened." She did it herself. "You're still going to argue?" She just returned. "She's here for work. As a member of this family you should understand what this evening means." He spoke as if I were an employee who had embarrassed the company. "Go home, Katya. I don't need you here with a face like that." A face like that. The face he had just marked in front of every important person in our world. I looked at him one last time. "Do you remember what day it is?" For a fraction of a second his expression shifted. Our 5th anniversary. He had forgotten, or chosen to forget. Either way, the result was the same. Sophia made a soft, distressed sound. Dmitry looked away. "This isn't the place," he said. No apology, no recognition. Just the same dismissive tone he used when a conversation no longer interested him. I nodded once. Yes, the single word seemed to relieve him. He thought I was surrendering the way I always had. I wasn't. I picked up my clutch from the floor. One of my heels wobbled, but I walked out of the ballroom without looking back. The collective intake of breath followed me like a second slap. No one stopped me. No one should have. Outside, the winter air of New York hit my lungs like ice. I hailed a cab, Upper East Side, I told the driver, cutting off whatever he was about to say about my face. I arrived home a little after 11. The apartment was quiet. Soft breathing came from the nursery. Misha was asleep under the care of the nanny Irina had arranged. I thanked the woman and sent her home. In the bathroom mirror, I finally looked at myself. The left side of my face was already swelling. Blood had dried at the corner of my mouth. I rinsed with cold water, pressed a wet cloth to my cheek until the pain sharpened my thoughts. Then stared at the wedding band on my right hand. 5 years earlier, Dmitri had slid that ring onto my finger and whispered that he would protect me. I soaked my hand under warm water and twisted. The skin split over the knuckle. Blood welled up, but I didn't stop. The ring came free and sat in my palm, lighter than I expected. 7 years of love reduced to a small circle of metal. I left it on the edge of the sink. In the bedroom, I pulled out a large suitcase. Clothes, underwear, the notebook I still used for sketches, an old leather portfolio from before the marriage, pieces I had designed in a tiny studio after design school, patterns marked in red pen by my mentor. I hadn't opened it in years. After becoming Mrs. Orlov, I had slowly stopped being a designer at all. I packed the portfolio. I left behind every expensive gift the company secretary had selected for me, every designer bag bought on the family card, every piece of jewelry chosen to make me look appropriate at corporate dinners. None of it had ever been mine. From the back of a drawer, I took the small sewing box I had owned since university, thread, scissors, chalk, a cheap thimble. Those went into the suitcase. In the nursery, I knelt beside Misha's bed. He looked so much like his father in sleep, but his nature was entirely different. Even at 4, he noticed when the air in the house changed. He would climb into my lap and ask if something hurt. I stroked his hair. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I won't let you grow up thinking that silence is love." I packed his clothes, 2 picture books, the blue plush dinosaur he slept with every night, the small toy fire engine, medications, and the documents I had already prepared for living abroad. 3 days earlier, the moment I learned Sophia had returned to the country, I had written to Roman Volkov in Paris, my old mentor. He had answered without asking unnecessary questions. An apartment was already waiting. Visa paperwork had been started months ago, just in case. I had hoped none of it would ever be needed. Tonight proved that hope had been a luxury I could no longer afford. At the living room table, I took out the divorce agreement my lawyer in Manhattan had prepared weeks earlier. I had told him then that I hadn't decided anything. He had simply said it was better to know the terms before emotion took over. I signed it, sole legal and physical custody of Mikhail. No division of marital assets. I wanted nothing that belonged to the Orlov name. Visitation to be determined later according to Misha's well-being and with professional involvement if necessary. I left the signed agreement, the family credit card, and the blood-streaked wedding ring on the table. Around 2 in the morning, the electronic lock beeped. I stood. My heart slammed once, hard, expecting Dmitri. Irina walked in instead, still in her evening gown, a shawl thrown carelessly over her shoulders. The moment she saw my face, she stopped. "Did he do this?" "Yes." She crossed the room, reached toward my cheek, then stopped her hand an inch away. She understood that touch would hurt. "That fool," she whispered. Then she wrapped her arms around me carefully, avoiding the swollen side of my face. "Forgive me. You don't have to apologize. He's my son. But you are not him." Her eyes moved to the table. The ring, the card, the documents. The color drained from her face. "What is this?" "I'm filing for divorce." "Don't decide tonight." I didn't decide tonight. She looked at me for a long time. "You've been preparing." I tried not to think about it. Thinking made it real. Irina sat down heavily. "He's blinded by that woman. I'll talk to him. I'll make him understand." "It isn't about Sophia," I said. She only made visible what was already broken. Tears gathered in Irina's eyes as she read the agreement page by page. "You prepared this so carefully." I was afraid that if I stayed, Misha would learn the wrong lessons about love. She covered her mouth with one hand. After a long silence, she asked the only question that mattered. If he came through that door right now, got on his knees, and begged, "Would you stay?" The answer came without hesitation. No. Irina closed her eyes. Then I won't try to stop you. At 4:30 a.m. I carried Misha, still wrapped in a blanket, down to Irina's rarely used car. New York was still dark. In the back seat, my son slept against my chest, one small hand fisted in my coat. Irina drove in near silence. Just before the airport, she stopped at a red light. "When you arrive, call me. I'll keep your new number. I won't tell Dmitri until you decide otherwise." In the parking lot, she pressed a bank card into my hand. "My personal account, not company money, not Orlov money. Take it. I have savings. I know, take it anyway. After everything, don't make me a stranger too." Misha stirred and opened his eyes. "Grandma." Irina's face crumpled. She turned away so he wouldn't see her cry. "Go," she said without looking back. "Even if I'm crying, don't turn around." I wheeled the suitcase into the terminal. One-way tickets, no return date. At the gate, I gave Misha a small pastry. He ate with quiet concentration. My new phone buzzed once, a message from the lawyer. "Further communication will go through us. You do not need to respond if Mr. Orlov contacts you directly." I typed a single word, "Okay." Misha finished the pastry and looked up at me. "Mommy, are we not saying goodbye to Daddy?" My chest tightened. "Not right now. Later, when you want to see him, we'll talk about it." He thought for a moment, then took my hand. "Mommy, don't cry today, I'm with you." Boarding was called. We walked through the gate. Through the glass, the runway lights stretched into the dark. The plane began to move. The buildings of New York grew smaller. I did not look down. I had loved Dmitry Orlov for 7 years. I had been his wife for 5. I had made excuses for every absence, every forgotten promise, every night the dinner went cold. I had told myself that someday he would see how hard I had tried to protect our family. That someday never arrived. The imprint of his hand still burned on my face when the plane lifted into the sky. I did not cry. I simply decided, for the first time, not to go back. Dmitry Orlov woke after 2 in the afternoon, with a headache that felt like broken glass behind his eyes. The sheets smelled of unfamiliar perfume. For a few seconds he didn't remember where he was. Then Sophia's arm shifted across his chest, and the night came back in pieces. The ballroom, the wine, the sharp crack of his hand against Katya's face, the way she said and walked out without another word. Sophia was already awake, watching him. "She's probably furious," she said softly. "Maybe I should call and apologize." "Don't, but it was because of me. It wasn't your fault." The words came out automatically. He had said them so many times in his head since last night that they felt true. He showered, dressed in yesterday's clothes, and left without eating. On Madison Avenue, he stopped at a jewelry store he had never entered before. The clerk recognized the name on his black card and laid out trays of diamonds. Dmitri barely looked. He pointed at the most expensive brooch on the velvet and said, "That one. A gift for your wife, Mr. Orlov." Yes, he believed it. An expensive gift had always been enough before. Katya would be quiet for a few days, then everything would return to the way it had always been. That was the pattern of their marriage. He had never needed to examine it. The apartment on the Upper East Side was silent when he opened the door at 4 o'clock. No sound of Misha's footsteps, no low music from the kitchen. Only the living room lamp still burning, and Irina sitting in the armchair with her back perfectly straight. She did not greet him. 3 objects lay on the coffee table. Katya's wedding ring with dried blood along the inner band, the Orlov family credit card, and a thin stack of papers. Dmitri set the jewelry box down and picked up the top page. Waiver of marital assets. Request for sole legal and physical custody of Mikhail Orlov. Visitation to be determined later according to the child's well-being. He laughed once, short and disbelieving. "Divorce again? She's always like this. One argument and she goes silent to make me guess." Irina's voice was quiet. "Has she ever said the word divorce before?" "She didn't have to. It's the same thing." "It is not the same thing." He pushed the papers aside and opened the box so she could see the brooch. "I'll give her this. She'll calm down." Irina stared at the diamonds. Did you choose it yourself? I asked for the best they had. Have you ever seen Katya wear a brooch? He didn't answer. Irina stood. The movement was slow, controlled. You came home with a gift instead of an apology. You still think this is a tantrum. I went too far last night. I'm making a concession. The slap came so fast he didn't see her hand move. His head snapped to the side. The sting was nothing compared to what he had given Katya, but the shock of it, his own mother striking him, froze him in place. The pain she felt was nothing like this, Irina said. You hit your wife in front of partners and journalists because of that woman. Mom, stop calling her that. She was your wife. The woman who carried this family for 5 years while you were too busy to notice. Dimitri's anger rose to cover the first real unease. You're exaggerating, it was a family argument. Katya started it, she was jealous and threw wine on Sophia. Did you see it? He hesitated. I saw enough. Irina picked up her phone from the table. On the screen was a video file sent by the production company that had filmed the event. Then watch what everyone else saw. She pressed play. The camera angle was clear. Sophia's hand closing around Katya's wrist. Katya trying to pull free. Sophia glancing toward Dimitri, then deliberately tilting the glass, wine spreading across the white dress. Sophia stepping backward and letting her knees buckle. Katya never touching her. Then Dimitri's own figure entering the frame, helping Sophia up, turning on Katya, the open-handed strike. The way her head snapped sideways, the blood at the corner of her mouth. He reached for the phone. Stop it. Irina did not stop it. He watched the sequence twice more. The third time he muttered, It's edited. I checked the source files. They are clean. I'll ask Sophia myself. You still need her version more than the video. He slammed the phone down. Katya hated her. She could have provoked the whole thing. And for that you hit her in public. I was protecting the company. Irina laughed, a dry, broken sound. By striking your wife in front of the press. That was the scandal, Dimitri, not a glass of wine. He grabbed his keys. Where is she? She left this morning. With Misha. They are no longer in the country. The words landed harder than the slap. Where? I'm not telling you. He stared at his mother as if she had become a stranger. I'm your son. That is exactly why I am stopping you from doing more damage. He left the apartment without another word. For the next 6 hours he used every resource he still believed belonged to him. He called his secretary and ordered her to locate Katya's flight records. She refused, citing legal boundaries. He called the legal department. They told him carefully that the company could not be used to track a private citizen, even if that citizen was still technically his wife. He shouted. They repeated the same sentence in different words. By midnight, the only information he had was a single confirmed fact. A one-way flight to Paris that morning under the names Ekaterina Orlova and Mikhail Orlov. No return ticket. No forwarding address. Sophia arrived at the apartment just after he returned. She took one look at the overturned papers and the open jewelry box on the floor and went pale. What happened? She's gone. Katya? He turned on her. Say her name again and get out. Sophia's eyes filled on cue. Yesterday was a misunderstanding. She was emotional. You grabbed her wrist. You poured the wine on yourself. There is video. The tears stopped as quickly as they had started. For a moment something colder showed underneath. I was alone for 2 years, she said. You never forgot me. I only wanted to make sure you still cared. Dimitri looked at her and felt nothing but exhaustion. Get out. Tomorrow the joint project with Vance Design will be under review. A brand ambassador who stages false incidents is a liability. She tried to touch his arm. He stepped back. Don't. Sophia left. The door closed with a soft click that somehow sounded final. Dmitri stood in the silent apartment and finally walked into the nursery. The bed was neatly made. The expensive toys he had occasionally ordered through his secretary still sat on the shelves. The blue plush dinosaur Misha slept with every night was gone. So were the 2 picture books Katya always kept on the nightstand. He sat down on the edge of the small bed and stayed there until the sky outside began to lighten. He called Katya's number again and again. Each time the same mechanical voice told him the line was no longer in service. Her messaging accounts had been deleted. The family phone plan showed her number disconnected at 5:17 that morning. For the first time in years, Dmitry Orlov encountered a problem his name and money could not solve in a single afternoon. He refused to sign the divorce papers for almost a month. He told the lawyer he would not agree to anything until he spoke to Katya in person. The reply that came back through legal channels was brief: no in-person meetings are planned. If an agreement is not reached, proceedings will move to family court. He called Irina every day. She never answered the same way twice, but the substance never changed. She doesn't want to hear from you. I'm his father. Then act like one. Right now you are only a man who is late. In the end he signed. Not because he accepted the end of the marriage, but because some desperate part of him still believed that once the papers were final, she would contact him. She never did. 3,000 miles away, Katya Orlova stood in a small short-term apartment in the 11th arrondissement of Paris and unpacked the suitcase she had carried onto the plane. Misha ran from room to room, delighted by the high windows and the unfamiliar sounds of the street below. Roman Volkov had met them at the airport with quiet efficiency, handed her a set of keys, and said only, "Rest today. Tomorrow we talk about work if you want." She had expected the first night to feel like relief. Instead, it felt like standing on a ledge with no railing. The silence was too complete. There was no one to wait for, no one to make excuses for, no one whose mood she had to read before she spoke. She put Misha to bed with the blue dinosaur and sat by the window looking out at the unfamiliar lights. Her cheek still ached. When she touched it, the skin was tight and tender. She opened the old portfolio she had brought with her. The pages smelled of graphite and time. At the back of the first sketchbook was a note she had written at 22. "Create dresses that help a woman look forward." She read the sentence twice, then closed the book. In the morning she would begin again. Not as Mrs. Orlov, not as the woman who waited. Simply as Katya. Someone who still remembered how to start with a single bolt of fabric and an empty table. She did not know yet that Dmitry was already tearing through New York, looking for her. She did not know how long it would take him to understand that the empty house he returned to was not a temporary punishment, but the first true consequence of every choice he had made for 5 years. She only knew that for the first time in a very long time, the future was no longer something she had to shrink herself to fit. It was something she would have to build. The first morning in Paris smelled of rain and coffee from the cafe beneath the apartment. Katya woke before Misha, sat on the edge of the narrow bed, and listened to the unfamiliar rhythm of the street. No one expected her to be anywhere, no calendar of corporate dinners, no silent pressure to appear composed for the sake of the Orlov name. The freedom felt almost violent in its emptiness. Roman Volkov arrived at 9 with a set of keys to a small workroom, 2 metro stops away, and a simple instruction. You start like everyone else. If you don't understand something, ask. I won't treat you carefully because of the child, and I won't treat you carefully because of who you used to be. She nodded. That was exactly what she needed. The atelier was nothing like the polished design studios she had visited as Mrs. Orlov. It occupied the ground floor of an old building near the Canal Saint-Martin. The windows were large but drafty. Bolts of fabric leaned against the walls in uneven stacks. The air carried the permanent scent of steam, wool, and chalk. 3 younger assistants already worked at the cutting tables when she arrived. None of them looked up with recognition. No one called her Madame Orlov. No one lowered their voice when she entered. Roman assigned her to the most basic tasks: sorting fabric by weight and composition, restocking thread, preparing mannequins for fittings, cleaning the steam irons at the end of the day. She moved more slowly than the others. Her French was functional but imperfect. Technical terms slipped away when she needed them most. Twice in the first week, she cut a piece incorrectly and had to begin again under the quiet, unsmiling observation of the head cutter. At night, she collected Misha from the small preschool Roman had helped arrange. The boy was tired and clingy in a way he had never been in New York. He asked for his old room. He asked if Grandma Irina would visit soon. Once, sitting on the floor of the tiny living room with his blue dinosaur, he looked up and said, "Is Daddy still at work?" Katya sat beside him. "Daddy is in another country now. We're going to live here for a while." Misha considered this with the serious concentration of a 4-year-old. "Are you sad?" "Sometimes," she answered honestly. "But I'm also glad you're with me." He leaned against her side and did not ask again that evening. The days settled into a rhythm that was both exhausting and strangely clarifying. She woke early, prepared a simple breakfast, walked Misha to preschool, then spent 8 or 9 hours at the atelier. In the evenings she cooked, helped him with the few French words he was already collecting, and sketched after he fell asleep. The sketches were rough at first. Lines that still carried the hesitation of someone who had not trusted her own hand in years. Slowly the hesitation began to loosen. Roman never praised easily. When she finally produced a clean muslin prototype of a simple long-sleeved dress, he examined it in silence for almost a minute before saying, "The shoulder is better. Do it again in the heavier crepe." She did. 3 months in, one of her designs, an understated wedding dress with clean lines and a high neck, was selected for a small private showing the atelier held for local buyers. It was not a triumph. Only 11 people attended. 2 made polite comments. 1 requested a fitting. But when the model walked out in the dress, Katya had drafted, cut and sewn largely herself, something in her chest settled into place for the first time since the night of the slap. She was no longer performing the role of a wife who designed on the side. She was simply working. Misha changed more visibly than she did. The constant listening for the front door that had marked his last year in New York gradually disappeared. He stopped asking whether Daddy would come home after the next trip. He began bringing home drawings of the canal and the baker, who always gave him an extra piece of baguette. On evenings when Katya worked late, Roman sometimes collected him. The first time Misha called him Monsieur Roman. With careful pronunciation, Roman only nodded and corrected nothing. He never tried to replace anyone. He simply remained consistent. An adult who arrived when he said he would and left when the work was finished. Katya noticed the difference most clearly in herself. In New York, she had spent years translating Dimitri's silences, adjusting her tone, softening requests so they would not sound like demands. Here no one required that labor. If she made a mistake, the mistake belonged to Katya. If a garment turned out well, the credit belonged to Katya. The simplicity was almost shocking. She kept in occasional contact with Irina through a new number. The conversations were careful and warm. Irina never asked her to return, and never offered news of Dmitri unless Katya asked, which she rarely did. Once, after a particularly long day, Irina said quietly, "He is still looking for ways to reach you. I tell him nothing. Thank you. You don't need to thank me for that." 6 months after her arrival, Roman placed a folder on her work table. A small bridal presentation in the Marais next spring. They want 3 original pieces from the atelier. One of them can be yours if you want the responsibility. She looked at the dates, the requirements, the modest budget. "I'll do it. Then you handle the client meetings yourself. I won't translate for you. I know." That night, after Misha was asleep, she opened the old sketchbook again and read the sentence she had written at 22, "Create dresses that help a woman look forward." She underlined it once, lightly, then began a new page. The work that followed was harder than anything she had done in the first months. She revised the same silhouette 11 times. She argued quietly with the fabric supplier over the exact weight of silk. She stayed until midnight more than once, the only light in the atelier coming from her table lamp. Roman never told her to go home, but he sometimes left a container of food on the corner of her table without comment. In early spring the 3 dresses were shown. Katya's piece, a long-sleeved gown with a clean column shape and almost no ornament, received the most attention. 2 private clients requested consultations the following week. a small fashion blog wrote 3 paragraphs about an uncredited designer at Volkov's atelier who understands restraint. Roman forwarded the link without adding a single word of praise. She understood the silence as approval. By the end of the first year, she was no longer only an assistant. Roman began giving her independent projects. The workroom that had once felt foreign began to feel like the first place she had belonged in a long time. She still made mistakes. She still struggled with certain technical French terms. But the fear that used to sit permanently under her ribs, the fear of being found insufficient, of needing to justify her presence, had thinned. Misha turned 5. On his birthday, they walked along the canal and ate ice cream, even though the air was still cool. He spoke a mixture of English and French now, switching without noticing. When a woman at the ice cream stand asked if the man waiting a short distance away was his father, Misha glanced at Roman and said, quite clearly, "That's Monsieur Roman. He helps Mommy with the dresses." Roman's expression did not change, but something in the set of his shoulders eased. Katya noticed. She did not rush toward any conclusion. She had learned the cost of building a life around someone else's feelings. Whatever was growing between her and Roman remained unnamed, steady, and free of urgency. He never pushed. She never pretended. At night, after the sketches were put away and the apartment was quiet, she sometimes stood at the window and allowed herself to remember the grand ballroom. The sound of the slap, the way Dmitri had looked at her as if she were a problem to be removed, the strange calm that had followed. The memory no longer arrived with the same sharp edge. It had become something she could hold at a distance and examine without bleeding. She was not happy every day. Some mornings, the loneliness of starting over still pressed against her. Some evenings, she missed the version of herself that had once believed patience would be rewarded. But she no longer mistook endurance for love, and she no longer waited for someone else to decide her worth. In the second year, the work expanded. A buyer from a small concept store in Lyon requested a limited capsule. 2 private brides commissioned custom pieces. Roman suggested, almost casually, that it might be time to put a name on the labels. "It's too soon," she said. "Whether it's too soon is decided by the people who want to buy the clothes," he answered. "If it fails under your name. That is better than succeeding under someone else's." She thought of the years she had been introduced only as Dmitri Orlov's wife. She thought of the way people had looked past her, even while speaking to her. The next morning she told him the name, Atelier Ta Alex, not Orlova. Not anything that still carried the weight of the life she had left. Simply the name she had always answered to when she was only herself. Roman nodded once. "Then we begin." The divorce was finalized on a gray Tuesday in late autumn. Dmitri signed the last page in his lawyer's office without reading it again. He had already memorized every clause. Sole custody to the mother, no shared assets. Visitation to be discussed only through specialists, and only when it served the child's well-being. The language was cold and precise. It left him nothing to negotiate. He told himself that once the papers were complete, she would finally respond. She did not. The lawyer relayed a single sentence from her side. The matter was closed. In the months that followed, Dmitri returned to the company with a ferocity that unsettled even longtime executives. He arrived earlier, left later, and accepted no excuses. The joint project with Vance Design was quietly dismantled. Sophia's name was removed from every document. When she tried to reach him, her calls were blocked at the switchboard. He never spoke of her again. Yet the work did not fill the space that had been left behind. The Upper East Side apartment remained exactly as Katya had left it. He forbade the staff from rearranging anything in the nursery. The blue dinosaur's absence was more noticeable than any of the expensive toys that still sat untouched on the shelves. Sometimes, late at night, he stood in the doorway of that room and listened to the silence as if it might eventually explain itself. Irina spoke to him only when necessary. Their conversations were brief and stripped of warmth. When he demanded Katya's address, she refused. When he asked whether Misha still remembered him, she answered, "Children remember the people who stay." He began traveling to Paris under the thin justification of European expansion. The Orlov Hospitality Group did open a small development office there, but the real purpose of the trips was never spoken aloud. He would check into a hotel on the right bank, cancel most of his meetings, and spend hours walking the streets near the Canal Saint-Martin. Once he found the Atelier, he sat in a black car across the street for nearly an hour, watching the large windows. He saw figures moving inside, but never clearly enough to be certain one of them was her. He never stepped out of the car. Each time he returned to New York, emptier than before. In Paris, the work continued without drama. Atelier Alex remained small, but the orders became steadier. A bridal salon in Lyon requested a limited run of the long-sleeved column dress that had first drawn attention. 2 private clients from Switzerland commissioned custom pieces. Katya hired her first full-time assistant. A quiet young woman from Toulouse, who never asked personal questions and treated every pattern as if it mattered. The atelier expanded into the adjacent room. Roman oversaw the structural changes with the same calm efficiency he brought to everything else. He never suggested that the success belonged to him. When journalists began requesting interviews after a small presentation in the Marais, he simply handed Katya the list of questions and said, "Answer only what you want to answer." She learned to speak about the clothes without speaking about the life that had produced them. She never mentioned New York. She never mentioned a former husband. The story she offered was simple. A designer who had returned to the work after years away and preferred garments that allowed a woman to move forward rather than perform. Misha turned 6. His French had become fluent enough that he sometimes corrected her pronunciation with the unthinking confidence of a child. He still slept with the blue dinosaur, now worn thin at the ears. On weekends, the 3 of them, Katya, Misha, and Roman, often walked along the Seine. Misha would hold one of their hands and swing between them when the path was wide enough. He had stopped calling Roman Monsieur. The name had simply become Roman, spoken with the easy familiarity of someone who had become part of the ordinary structure of his days. Katya noticed the shift without forcing it into definition. Whatever existed between her and Roman had grown the way good seams are made, slowly, with attention, without haste. He never asked her to decide anything before she was ready. She never pretended a certainty she did not yet feel. One evening after Misha was asleep, Roman stood at the cutting table reviewing a news muslin and said, almost casually, "A buyer from New York contacted the atelier today. They want a meeting." Katya's hands stilled on the fabric. "I declined," he continued. "I told them the designer does not take meetings connected to that city." She looked at him. "You didn't have to do that." "I know. I did it anyway." The quiet that followed was comfortable. She realized she was no longer waiting for the other shoe to drop, the moment when care would turn into ownership, when patience would be demanded as proof of love. Roman simply remained. The difference still surprised her some days. Irina called every few weeks. The conversations were short and careful. She never pressed for details about Dmitri, and Katya rarely asked. Once, after a longer silence than usual, Irina said, "He comes to Paris often. I think he hopes he will see you by accident." "I know. Does it trouble you?" "No," Katya answered, and found that the word was true. "He's part of a life that no longer belongs to me." After she hung up, she stood at the window for a long time. The street below was wet with recent rain. She thought of the woman who had once measured her worth by how little space she took up in her own marriage. That woman felt distant now, like someone she had known well, but no longer needed to protect. By the middle of the second year, Atelier Alex had a clear voice. The clothes were restrained, precise, and quietly confident. They did not rely on spectacle. A short feature in a respected independent magazine described the work as designed for women who have already survived something and no longer wish to perform fragility. Katya read the sentence twice and then closed the laptop. She did not need the validation, but she did not reject it either. Roman suggested a small presentation of the new collection in a borrowed gallery space near the Bastille. The budget was modest. The guest list was carefully chosen. When he asked whether she wanted to be present on the evening of the show, she said yes without hesitation. The night of the presentation, the room was full. When the final model walked through in a cream column dress with long sleeves and a clean neckline, the applause was steady and genuine. Someone called for the designer. Katya stepped out from behind the curtain. The lights were bright. For a moment she felt the old instinct to stand slightly to the side, to leave space for someone more important. Then she remembered there was no one else. She stood in the center and answered 3 short questions. Her voice did not shake. Afterward, in the small back room, Roman handed her a glass of water and said nothing for a while. Then he spoke quietly. "You looked like someone who had chosen the place she was standing." She met his eyes. "I have." That same week, a thick envelope arrived from a New York development firm, unaffiliated with the Orlov Group. The proposal was generous: a flagship store, substantial backing, full creative control on paper. Katya read every page. Then she wrote a polite, firm refusal. She did not hate the city, she was not hiding from Dmitry. She simply no longer needed to return in order to feel complete. Roman read the letter before she sent it and only nodded. Good. In the evenings, the 3 of them ate together more often than not. Misha would report on his day in a mixture of languages, then insist on helping clear the table with the serious importance of a child who had decided he was useful. Sometimes Roman stayed late and worked on patterns at the kitchen table while Katya sketched. The silence between them had become a language of its own. One night, after Misha had gone to bed, Roman looked up from the paper and said, "I've been thinking about the future." Katya waited. "Not the business. The other part." She set her pencil down. "I'm listening." He did not rush. "I don't need an answer now. I only want you to know that when you are ready to decide what this is, I will still be here. And if you decide it is something permanent, I will not ask you to become smaller in order to fit it." The words settled over her without pressure. She felt no panic, no urge to protect herself by withdrawing. She simply reached across the table and touched the back of his hand. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm still here." Outside, Paris continued its ordinary evening noise. Somewhere across the city, a man who had once been her husband sat in a hotel room he did not need, waiting for a version of her that no longer existed. She did not think of him with anger. She did not think of him with longing. She thought of him the way one thinks of a closed door in a house one has already left. The life she was building required no further permission. The afternoon was mild, the kind of early autumn light that made the stone along the scene look warmer than it was. Katya walked with Misha on one side and Roman on the other. The boy held a paper bag with a still warm pastry and swung it as he talked about the new words he had learned that morning at school. Roman carried the larger bag of groceries and listened with the quiet attention he always gave the child. They were near the turn, toward the bridge, when the black car stopped too sharply on the opposite side of the street. The back door opened before the vehicle had fully settled. A man stepped out, stumbled once on the curb, and began to run. Katya did not recognize him at first. He was thinner, his hair was shorter. The expensive suit hung on him as if it belonged to a different body. Then he called her name. "Katya." The sound stopped her. Dmitry Orlov crossed the remaining distance without looking at the traffic. A driver shouted. A horn blared. He did not turn. He stopped a few steps away from her, breathing hard, and reached out a hand. She stepped back. His hand hung in the air for a moment before it fell. "It's really you," he said. His voice was rough, as if it had not been used for ordinary conversation in a long time. Roman moved slightly forward, placing himself between them without making a show of it. Misha pressed closer to Katya's leg and looked up at the stranger with open uncertainty. Dmitry's eyes moved from her face to the boy, and back again. Something in his expression fractured. "Katya, I looked for you every day." "I know. For 2 years. That must have been difficult." The calm in her voice seemed to wound him more than anger would have. "Don't speak to me like that, like I'm a stranger. We are strangers now." He took a half step closer. Roman's shoulders shifted in quiet warning. Dmitri noticed him fully for the first time. Who is this? Roman Volkov, I didn't ask you. She doesn't need to answer you, Roman said evenly. Dmitri's jaw tightened. He looked back at Katya. Did he keep you from contacting me? No, the decision was mine. You're not the kind of woman who abandons her family. I didn't abandon a family. She held his gaze. I left a man who never treated me like one. The words landed. For a moment, Dmitri seemed to struggle for air. I know I was wrong, about everything. I removed Sophia from every project. I haven't spoken to her since that night. I revised the contracts. That has nothing to do with me. How can you say that? I did it because of you. You did it for yourself. If it had been an apology meant for me, you would have offered it 2 years ago. I'm offering it now. His voice rose. I'll apologize as many times as you want. I'll leave the company. I'll do whatever you ask. I don't ask for anything. Then come back. The sentence hung between them, raw and almost childish in its demand. Katya shook her head once. No, you can't decide that alone. I already did. You signed the papers. I signed because I thought you would finally speak to me. You never treated my decision as a decision. Even after the divorce, you believed I was only waiting for you to arrive. Dmitri's face had gone pale. He looked at Misha again. Michael. His name is Misha, Katya said quietly. And he doesn't know you. The boy had begun to hide behind Roman's coat. Dmitri crouched slightly, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes. Misha. It's Daddy. Misha looked at his mother, then at the man and whispered. Mommy, who is that? Dmitri flinched as if struck. What are you saying? It's me. You don't remember? Misha stepped farther back. He's scary. Roman lifted the child into his arms without ceremony. Misha buried his face against Roman's shoulder. Don't touch him, Roman said when Dmitri reached forward. He's my son. And that gives you the right to frighten him? Dmitri's voice turned sharp. You took my place. No, Katya said. You left it empty long before we left New York. She watched the recognition move across his face. The preschools he had never visited, the hospital night he had missed, the breakfasts he had never known about, the 3 days before their anniversary when he had not come home. All the small absences that had added up to a single truth. He had been a father in name and almost nothing else. I was working for the family, he said. But the old justification sounded thin even to him. The day after you hit me, the first thing you bought was jewelry, Katya answered. Not an apology, not a question about whether your son was all right. A brooch you chose by price. Dmitri had no reply. Around them, people had begun to notice the raised voices. A few slowed their steps. Dmitri did not seem to see them. He looked only at her. Just once, he said. Talk to me. The 3 of us. There is no 3 of us anymore. His eyes moved to Roman, and something ugly and desperate mixed in his expression. You choose him. I'm not comparing. There is nothing to compare. Don't say that. I chose a life in which no one raises a hand to me. The sentence was quiet. It ended the argument more completely than shouting could have. Dmitri's mouth opened, then closed. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its edge. I only hit you once. The small remaining softness in Katya's chest disappeared. Once, she repeated, so we can pretend it never happened. That isn't what I meant. Then what did you mean? That an apology now creates an obligation for me to return. I love you. She had waited 7 years to hear those words spoken without distraction or condition. They arrived too late to matter. Whether you love me or not no longer has any place in my life. Dmitri's knees bent. He went down on the cobblestones in the middle of the sidewalk, hands pressed to the stone, head bowed. I'm sorry, I didn't believe you. I hit you. I didn't see you or Misha or anything that mattered. I understand now. Please, come back. Katya looked at the man who had once been the center of her decisions and felt only a distant, tired clarity. No, just once more. The answer will not change. 2 of Roman's colleagues, who had been walking a short distance behind them, stepped forward and blocked Dmitri when he tried to rise and follow. He shoved at them, still calling her name. She did not turn. Misha lifted his head from Roman's shoulder as they walked away. Mommy, why is that man crying? Roman answered before she could find the words. Sometimes a person loses in something important and only understands its value after it's gone. Misha thought about this with the seriousness he brought to every new idea. But if you find it again, can't you put it back? Some things, Roman said, can't be put back the way they were. The boy considered the answer, then reached for Katya's hand. She took it. His fingers were warm and slightly sticky from the pastry. Behind them, Dimitri's voice still rose once or twice above the traffic and the accordion someone was playing farther along the embankment. The sound grew thinner with distance. Katya kept walking. She did not look back. They turned the corner. The river light shifted on the water. Misha began talking again about the vanilla ice cream he had decided he wanted later, as if the strange man on the sidewalk had already begun to fade into something unimportant. Roman adjusted the boy higher on his arm and glanced once at Katya. She met his eyes and gave a small nod. She was steady. The life she had built did not require the man who had finally arrived to ask for it back. It had never been his to reclaim. 3 months passed before the city felt ordinary again. Katya did not speak of the afternoon by the river, unless Roman asked, and he asked only once. She answered that Dmitri had arrived too late to change anything that mattered, and that was the end of the subject. Misha never mentioned the crying man. Children, she had learned, released what no longer belonged to them more cleanly than adults ever could. The work continued. Atelier Alex prepared its first independent collection under its own name. The pieces were fewer than a large house would have shown, but each one carried the quiet precision Katya had spent 2 years refining: long sleeves, clean necklines, fabrics that moved without demanding attention, clothes for women who no longer needed to perform softness in order to be allowed space. On the evening of the presentation, the borrowed gallery near the Bastille was full. When the final model walked the short length of the room in a cream column dress, the applause rose and held. Someone called for the designer. Katya stepped into the light. Cameras lifted. For a brief second, the old instinct returned. The urge to stand half a step behind someone more important, but there was no one else. She stood in the center and answered the questions in a steady voice. "What is the theme of the collection?" "Choosing for yourself," she said. That is all. No further explanation was required. In the small room behind the gallery, a thick envelope waited on the table. It contained a formal proposal from a New York development group unrelated to the Orlov name, a flagship store, substantial financial backing, and the promise of wide visibility. Katya read every page. Then she drafted a polite refusal. She did not hate the city that had shaped her earlier life. She was not afraid of encountering Dmitri. She simply no longer needed to return in order to feel that her work had weight. The decision felt clean. Roman read the letter over her shoulder and said nothing for a moment. Then he touched the edge of the paper. Good. Dmitri still came to Paris. Irina mentioned it only when the information seemed necessary. He arrived under the cover of business, stayed in the same hotel on the right bank, and sometimes sat in a parked car across from the atelier for an hour or more. He never left the vehicle. Katya never drew the curtains. She had no reason to hide and no interest in driving him away. Whether he watched or not no longer altered the shape of her days. The company in New York continued to grow under his direction. But those who had known him longest noticed the change. He worked longer hours than before, accepted fewer social invitations, and spoke of the future only in the language of expansion and numbers. The apartment on the Upper East Side remained largely untouched. The nursery door stayed closed. Irina called every few weeks. The conversations were brief and steady. She asked about Misha's school, about the new collection, about whether Katya was sleeping enough. She never asked her to soften toward Dmitri, and Katya never offered updates on him. Once, near the end of a call, Irina said quietly, "I still think of you as my daughter." That has not changed. Katya's throat tightened, but her voice remained even. "I know, thank you." In the spring, Roman asked her to marry him. There was no grand gesture. They were in the atelier after the others had left. Misha was at a friend's apartment for the afternoon. Roman stood at the cutting table with a finished muslin in his hands and simply said, "I would like this life to be permanent, with you. If you want the same." Katya looked at the man who had never required her to shrink, who had met her at the airport with keys and quiet competence, who had corrected her French without impatience and collected her son from school without turning it into a claim. The answer rose without fear. Yes, they told Misha that evening. The boy considered the news with serious attention, then asked whether Roman would still help with the dresses, and whether they would still walk along the canal on Sundays. When both adults said yes, he nodded as if the important matters had been settled and returned to his drawing. The wedding was small. Irina flew to Paris and stood on Katya's side without hesitation. No one from the Orlov company was invited. No press was informed. Afterward, they returned to the same apartment near the canal, only now the name on the lease included all three of them. On a clear evening several weeks after the ceremony, Roman took a photograph of Katya and Misha near the window. The light was soft. Misha laughed at something Roman said from behind the camera. Katya, caught mid-smile, looked directly into the lens without adjusting her expression for anyone else's comfort. When Roman showed her the image later, she studied it for a long time. The woman in the frame had no tension in her shoulders. She was not measuring her words in advance. She was simply present. Misha leaned against her arm and pointed at the screen. "Mommy is beautiful. Thank you, and me too, of course. But Roman is taking the picture, so he's not in it." Roman laughed. "Next time, all three of us," Katya nodded. Next time. Outside, the evening settled over the rooftops of Paris. She thought of the night she had pulled the wedding ring from her swollen finger, of the blood on the white napkin, of the one-way ticket, and the silent drive to the airport. She had not been able to see the future then. She had only known that she would not return. That single decision had been enough. It had led to the work table where she now spent her days, to the child who no longer listened for a door that would not open, to the man who stood beside her without needing to own the space she occupied. The years of swallowed words and careful endurance had not vanished. They remained part of the story for you. But they no longer dictated its ending. She was no longer Mrs. Orlov. She was Ekaterina Orlova, designer of Atelier Alex, mother to Misha, and a woman who had chosen her own life. That was the whole of it, and it was sufficient.